The Celestial Empire had not lost a war in 9,000 years. It did not need to win quickly. It won the way a glacier wins by being patient, by being everywhere, by making the outcome feel inevitable long before the first shot was fired. 43 star systems flew its banner, not because their people had chosen it, but because 3 generations back, someone had calculated the cost of resistance and found it too high, and every generation since had inherited that calculation instead of questioning it. The Empire's capital was a construct called the Aurelian Throne World, a ring of 31 linked stations built around a captured star. No fleet had ever reached it. No fleet had ever tried, because the Empire made sure every species in its reach understood, early and permanently, what happened to the ones who tried. At the center of that machine sat the Court of Nine, immortal administrators who had not aged in centuries, who did not remember what it felt like to be uncertain about an outcome. They did not rule through cruelty, particularly. Cruelty was inefficient. They ruled through certainty, the total, structural certainty that nothing could change, so nothing was worth risking a life to change. Humanity had been a border colony for 6 years when the Empire's tax fleet arrived to collect its first tribute. The colony's name was Ashfall Reach, population 11,000, unarmed by treaty, 3 months past its founding charter. The fleet commander, an ascended administrator named Lord Cashinvey, had done this collection run 400 times. He did not expect Ashfall Reach to be different. He was wrong exactly once, and it was the last mistake the Empire ever survived making. Daniel Osai was 36, human, a former combat engineer who had spent the last decade of the war doing something the Empire's historians would later call, with visible discomfort, logistics. He had not asked to be Ashfall Reach's chief engineer. He had been assigned it, the way a man who is good at a job is quietly handed every job nobody else wants. When Lord Vey's tax fleet dropped out of transit above the colony, Daniel was the one standing in the command room when the ultimatum came through, pay in refined ore, or the colony's orbital shield came down and stayed down. Ashfall Reach did not have refined ore to spare. It had barely finished its first harvest. Daniel did not argue with the ultimatum. He asked for 6 hours to organize the tribute. Lord Vey, who had heard every version of this stalling tactic across 4 centuries of collections, granted it out of pure procedural boredom. 6 hours changed nothing, historically. Colonies that stalled paid the same tribute, plus a penalty, plus whatever the ascended administrator felt like adding for the inconvenience. In those 6 hours, Daniel did not organize tribute. He rerouted the colony's entire industrial reactor grid through 11 mining charges, originally rated for asteroid fracturing, retuned their yield curves by hand, and placed them along the exact approach vector. His sensors told him the tax fleet's shuttle would use to dock. Because Lord Vey, like every ascended administrator before him, always used the same approach vector. It was efficient. It had never once needed to be anything else. When the shuttle docked, it did not simply detonate. Daniel had built the charges to fold inward first, collapsing the shuttle's containment field before the explosive yield ever reached open space, turning 900 years of imperial confidence in a safe, standard approach into the exact geometry of its own destruction. Lord Vey did not report back to the throne world. Nothing did from Ashfall Reach for 11 days. In the colony itself, there was no celebration. Daniel had not built the charges to make a statement. He had built them because the alternative was watching 11,000 people hand over a harvest they needed to survive the winter, to a fleet that would simply return in a year for more of the same. He spent the first of the 11 silent days doing what he always did, checking the reactor grid for stress fractures, running the numbers on how long the colony's food stores would last if the Empire decided to answer with something larger. He assumed correctly that it would. When the Court of Nine finally opened an inquiry, it was Archminister Selene, the youngest of the 9 at only 800 years old, and therefore the one still capable of being surprised, who pulled the sensor logs herself. She watched the tax fleet's last transmission 11 times. The first 2 viewings, she assumed sabotage from within the fleet, an act of internal imperial dissent, something explicable within a framework she understood. The next 4 viewings were spent searching for the outside actor the internal sabotage theory required. There wasn't one. Every signal traced back to the colony itself, to a single engineering terminal, to a man with no military rank and no imperial file worth the name. She requested Daniel Osai's full record. It was almost insultingly short. 6 years of colony logistics reports. A service history from the tail end of a war the Empire had never bothered to track, fought on a world too small and too far to have registered as a threat. No decorations, no warnings, nothing that explained what she had just watched. She did not yet understand that this absence was the answer. The Empire's intelligence had never flagged Daniel Osai because the Empire's intelligence was built to flag ambition, rank, and reputation, and Daniel had cultivated none of those. He had simply been competent quietly for 6 years, waiting for a problem worth solving. She pulled the colony's founding charter next, hoping it might explain what the service record didn't. It told her only that Ashfall Reach had been settled by survivors of a war fought on a world so far from the Empire's usual attention that no imperial cartographer had bothered to log its outcome. The war itself was a footnote in a database of footnotes. Whatever had happened there, the Empire had never thought it worth understanding, and that, she was beginning to suspect, was the mistake underneath all the others. Archminister Selene sent a second fleet, not to collect tribute this time, to make an example. 12 warships, a full ascended battle commander named Thessarian Kale, and orders that did not use the word negotiate anywhere in them. Thessarian Kale had commanded imperial punitive fleets for 600 years. He did not consider Ashfall Reach a battle. He considered it an administrative correction with a live broadcast attached, because the court had ordered the engagement transmitted across every border colony as a warning. He hailed the colony from orbit expecting the usual panic surrender, the desperate offer of tribute that always came too late to matter. Instead, a single voice answered, calm, unhurried. "Before you begin," Daniel said, "I'd like to ask something since this is being broadcast. How many of your warships have ever fought an enemy that could reach them first?" Kale did not answer immediately. The question did not fit any imperial precedent for how a doomed colony was supposed to speak. "None have needed to," Kale said eventually, because it was true, and because the court's rules of engagement required a response be given on an open channel. "Then this will be a new kind of record for you," Daniel said. "I'd suggest logging it carefully. It won't happen again." What happened next was not, by any imperial standard, a fair fight. It was not meant to be one. The Empire had built its entire war doctrine on the assumption that it would never need to fight fair, because nothing in 9,000 years had forced it to. Daniel had spent 11 days since the first fleet's destruction doing what he did best, making sure the next fight was decided before it started. He had stripped Ashfall Reach's mining fleet of every drive core, retrofitted them as unmanned ram vessels with human-built targeting solutions the Empire's sensors had never been calibrated to recognize, because they had never needed to recognize anything human-built as a threat. He had turned the colony's entire asteroid belt into a minefield disguised as ordinary orbital debris, the kind every Imperial fleet flew through without a second thought, because in 9,000 years, orbital debris had never once shot back. The first 3 ships broke formation the instant the debris field detonated around them, more out of confusion than doctrine. Nothing in their combat training accounted for a battlefield that fought back before the battle began. The confusion cost them the 11 seconds Daniel's ram vessels needed to close. Kale's flagship survived the opening minute, which was more than most of his fleet managed. He watched, through his own tactical display, as 6 centuries of imperial doctrine failed to produce a single useful response to an enemy who had simply refused to fight the fight the Empire had spent 9,000 years assuming it would always get. By the time it was over, 4 ships remained. Cale brought them in himself, alone, in a final approach he had used to end 41 engagements before this one. Daniel met him with a single squad and a colony militia armed with retrofitted mining equipment. It should not have been enough. Cale's own combat record said as much, right up until the moment his flagship's shields failed against a weapon system built from equipment that had never been designed to hurt anyone, because Daniel had spent 11 days making sure it was designed to now. Cale's signature went dark 40 minutes after the broadcast began. The transmission had reached every border colony in the Empire before Archminister Selling could order it cut. What the border colonies saw was not a battle in the way the Empire had always framed battles. Grand, distant, decided somewhere above their heads by forces too large to name. They saw 40 minutes of a single engineer, a militia, and a dozen retrofitted mining vessels dismantling a fleet that had, until that morning, been considered unstoppable by definition. The definition was the part that broke. A fleet can be rebuilt. A definition, once it fails on an open channel in front of 43 systems, cannot be repaired by any court, however old. The Court of Nine convened in full for the first time in 3 centuries. Archminister Selling did not open with strategy. She opened with the recording Cale's final transmission, the flagship's shields failing, the silence after. She let the other 8 watch it in full before anyone spoke. "He is one man," said Archminister Doran, the eldest of the 9, in the tone of someone still trying to make the arithmetic work. "One colony, 11,000 people with no fleet 6 years ago." "He was one man with 6 years and a reason," Selling said. "We have had 9,000 years and never once needed one." It was, without anyone intending it as such, the first true statement made in the court in longer than any of them could remember. The border colonies did not wait for the court's next move. Within a month, 4 more systems had stopped paying tribute, not because Daniel had told them to. He had never broadcast a call to arms, never claimed a title, never asked anything of anyone beyond Ashfall Reach. But because the recording had done something the Empire's 9,000 years of certainty had never allowed for. It had shown them the ceiling. It had shown them that the ceiling could be reached. The Empire tried 3 more times to restore the certainty by force. Each attempt reached Ashfall Reach with more ships and less doctrine that applied, because Daniel Osai was no longer defending a colony. He was dismantling, one calculated engagement at a time, the only thing the Empire had ever actually been built from: the shared, structural belief among 43 systems that resistance cost more than it was worth. By the time an Imperial envoy reached Ashfall Reach under a flag of formal parley, the first the Empire had ever raised in 9,000 years to anyone, the colony's population had grown to 40,000, swollen by refugees from systems that had stopped waiting for permission to leave. Archminister Selling came herself. She found Daniel in the same command room where the First Fleet's ultimatum had arrived, still doing what he had always done, logistics, quietly, for people who had never once needed to know his name to be grateful for the work. "You could have declared victory months ago," she said. "You never claimed one." "I wasn't fighting for a declaration," Daniel said. "I was fighting because the alternative was watching 11,000 people pay a debt they never agreed to owe. Everything after that was just the same math, applied further out." "The Empire has stood 9,000 years," Selling said. "It stood because nobody had run the numbers on what it would cost to test it," Daniel said. "I ran them. They came out lower than everyone assumed." Selling did not answer that. There was, for the first time in her 800 years, nothing in the court's 9,000-year record that told her what to say next. The Celestial Empire did not fall in a single battle. It fell the way it had ruled, structurally, from the inside, one system at a time, choosing to stop believing in a certainty that had already been broken on camera. Daniel Oss never sat on a throne. He returned when it was finished to the same engineering terminal in the same command room and filed a report, the last one anyone would ever need him to file about the empire.